Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Literacy View. So my co-host Judy Boxner and I, Faith Borkowski, are here for a surprise podcast. And we have a wonderful guest with us this evening. Both Judy and I have followed his articles in Chalkbeat. His name is Alex Zimmerman. Yay, Alex. We love what you write, and your article, Alex, caught our eye, and we decided we are going to do an immediate release of this episode tomorrow because it is a hot topic. Your article is entitled, "How is New York City's literacy curriculum mandate going? Teachers feel unprepared." And it just came out on the 27th of November. So we jumped all over that. And, this really is a real issue that's close to my heart. I know it is to Judy's as well, because I've been in education a very long time. I was part of Reading First, as I had mentioned to you earlier before, and that was all about getting schools to change and moving from one curriculum into another and changing programs, which is always very tough. And you wrote about this so beautifully, Alex. And even though New York City is, where you spend your time, this issue is something that is prevalent everywhere. And so we're going to keep it to really talking about the issues and how it affects everyone. In your article, Alex, you wrote down that the chancellor said, here, "In the best of all worlds, we would have studied this for the next 3 or 4 years," meaning, programs, and really looking at them deeply. Schools Chancellor David Banks said in an interview with Chalkbeat, "We are building the plane as we are flying it because kids' lives are actually hanging in the balance." That is a very powerful statement, because we were doing that in Reading First 20-something years ago. Exactly. And that was the term that we used, like building it as we're flying the plane. So could you talk a little bit about that statement and just the tone of what you were getting from teachers when you interviewed them?
Yeah, of course. So for listeners who aren't already clued into what's happening in New York City, basically about half of the city's elementary schools have to adopt one of three reading curriculums, and that began rolling out this fall. And then next school year, the remaining half of elementary schools have to use one of these three reading curriculums. For the second group of schools, we don't totally know which curriculums are going to be most popular, but for the schools that are adopting that program this fall, the most popular one by far is a program called InterReading by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. But to your question, in just talking to a lot of teachers who are in this first phase of the rollout, I think the prevailing sense from them is that they just haven't had a lot of time or training to prepare. So when the chancellor talks about this, he talks about it with a great deal of urgency. And I think that comes from a place of, him feeling like the state reading scores show that, about half of the city's students in grades 3 through 8 are not on grade level in reading. And so he feels like his mandate is to really improve those numbers. And in that interview with him, he was talking about how, he was sort of persuaded both as an educator, like he used to be a principal in New York City and helped run sort of a small network of middle and high schools. And, his sense from that was, they would see students who were getting into, middle and high school really far behind in reading. And so I think he has some personal experience with that. but I think was also persuaded by some of the debate that's happening more broadly about the science of reading. And, he mentioned in that interview with me, having listened to Sold a Story, the podcast that Emily Hanford created. So I think he sort of felt like there's sort of like growing consensus around this issue, and like this feels like one high value spot where I can really focus a lot of my energy, and that's what he's done. Now I think there's a really important conversation to be had about like how that's playing out on the ground. And what we saw last school year, was the city announcing this sort of pretty broad curriculum change in May, which is, about a month before teachers generally go on summer vacation. Um, and, expecting about half of elementary schools to be implementing a new curriculum in the fall. So that just didn't leave a ton of time. And so when he's talking about building the plane as they're flying it, I think what he's talking about is that reality that there just like hasn't been very much time to do training, and his sense that like the better approach here is to just start implementing rather than take a whole bunch of runway and um, do lots of training in advance and do lots of sort of preparing in advance, and that you sort of just have to hit the ground running. This didn't make it into the story, but in the interview with me, he also mentioned that like his view was, in talking to some other states that have tried to do big curriculum overhauls, that like his perspective was like you could do like all the planning you want and it's still going to be messy when it comes to implementation, so like might as well just do implementation now. So I think that's kind of his worldview on that. But the perspective I'm getting from educators is that they've felt like a little bit unsupported, and that's been really hard.
Yeah. I feel like this is deja vu for me. Like this is the same conversation we had, like I said, over 20 years ago. Same issues, exactly. So Judy, so interesting. I could really understand this view, the sense of urgency of wanting to make a difference. But at the same time, it feels very rushed, and teachers feel unprepared, and coaches feel unprepared. And it's this feeling of, pushing something through before we're ready. But like Alex said, but it's going to be messy no matter what. So we better just act on it. What are some of your thoughts, and not about New York in particular? We don't want to get into the chancellor's decision because that is a big decision. He made a decision, but just in general, like just talking about jumping into something and it's messy. What are some of your thoughts about that?
So thanks, Faith, for that little piece of info. And I definitely want to let everybody know all views expressed tonight are 100%, as on every podcast that I've ever done, are my own. Yes, I still do work in the schools. I work with kids after school. I work with kids on the weekends. I work with kids during the day. I work with teachers. And, my journey, as everybody knows, I've been with the New York City schools now. This is my 26th year, even though I'm only in my 40s. But yeah, I've seen a lot of things happen. And, when I was just coming in 1997, phonics was on its way out. The foundational skills were like, it was like kind of like close your door, keep doing them, but they're not really the priority anymore. And balanced literacy was coming in. And, it's been in for a very long time, right? And unfortunately, so many kids in the city and worldwide and nationwide, and in Australia, we have viewers there, and in England and so forth, the literacy rates haven't been very, very good at all. And I think that the urgency is extremely real. Now, I was lucky that I was, on a team known as Universal Literacy a couple of years back. So my training in the science of reading was extremely intense. Then I was on a team known as the Literacy Collaborative. And again, we received some very, very strong training in the science. So I guess I'm blessed, but right, not everybody's going to be as blessed as I am to have that intensive training and support. I think what needs to happen now is we do have to go full force ahead. Kids really, they're not going to be in second grade another time. The longer we wait, the more kids we lose, right? And things will be messy. Even for me, you know, the first time I opened up a foundations box, I was petrified, right? I was a coach that didn't know foundations yet years and years ago. Now I know it really well. But, you know, I had to let go of that fear of not being perfect and just opening the box and just starting. And once you start, it's like anything else. You'll get better with practice. So I really feel, yes, I do wish teachers had more support. Yes, I do wish that every teacher had a coach in that building cheering them on, saying, you can do this. But, you know, it's going to be ugly. Even if you have years and years of experience, once you try something new, it's going to be really hard, right? Faith, we've been talking about it. Like even, you know, curriculums are going to say they're evidence and research based, but I don't know if every, you know, task is going that they provide is going to be aligned with the best research and science. It's still going to require a good teacher that, you know, is thinking about those kids in that classroom and also, you know, making instructional decisions that work for those kids.
Right. So, you know, I think, Alex, what we're seeing is that there's a need to get started, right? That's what you were hearing. There was this need to get started, but teachers are the ones now that have to kind of deal with this. And it's uncomfortable and it's not easy when they have to piece things together and they don't necessarily have the support. So now there was some decisions made to get rid of coaching, and then you know, other programs like Lucy Calkins, a lot of what teachers did like about Lucy was that it did provide a lot of coaching. A lot of schools had coaches that worked with the teachers, and there was a lot of continuous support. And I know, because I do that type of work. I go into schools and I do that continuous coaching. Could you speak to that?
But your coaching looks nothing like TC style coaching.
No, but it's different, obviously. But the idea is that they recognize the need for continuous coaching and feedback. Alex, could you talk a little bit about what you heard from teachers about the idea of continuous support, continuous coaching, feedback? In your article, I know there was a quote here. Let me see if I could find it. I think it was near the end, where it said, a coach, I think you wrote, a coach observed one of her lessons, meaning one of the teachers you interviewed, but there wasn't time for feedback. Now, to me, that's not coaching. You know, that doesn't make any sense. Why bother observing if there's not going to be a conversation about how to improve it? Could we hear from you, Alex?
Yeah, of course. So yeah, I thought that was a really interesting point too. And I definitely heard a range of things from teachers about what their interactions with these coaches have been like. So just to provide like a little bit of context, so the city has sort of pivoted from in-house coaching, so coaches who are predominantly like DOE employees and are assigned to specific schools, to this model where they're working more with outside vendors. So like other entities that are, you know, also employ people who are going into schools and classrooms and trying to help teachers improve their practice. You know, there have been some concerns about what that will mean in terms of like the intensity of coaching that teachers will get and like the extent to which teachers will trust those coaches if they're people that they're sort of just beginning to form relationships with. Although in some cases, like some of these organizations have been working in schools for a long time. So in some cases, teachers already do kind of know these people. But yeah, so what the DOE has said is that teachers should get at least 8 sessions with a coach over the course of the year to help acclimate to these new curriculums. And in some cases, what I heard from teachers were like, yes, I do find this coach to be helpful. Like I did talk to a teacher who was saying that the coach would basically come in and they would have opportunities on a pretty regular basis to like help plan the next week's lessons with that person and sort of troubleshoot any sort of sticking points. So they could come in with a lesson plan and say like, I'm trying to figure out like this element of the curriculum. Like, can you help me figure out like how to implement this? Or I ran into this problem in my classroom last week. Like, can you help me troubleshoot? And then I heard from other teachers who basically said something like, I know there is a coach. We maybe had a grade meeting with them, like a meeting with all the other teachers at my grade level, and they like offered some some talking points or some like introductory pieces of advice, but like hadn't really dug in a deep way into teaching practice. And in talking with one of the organizations that actually provides the coaching, they said that like at the beginning, what they're trying to do is just understand like what the needs in the school are. So that might help explain like why in some cases teachers are getting observed, but like aren't necessarily getting like detailed feedback yet. Like if that organization is just trying to understand like what the state of teaching practice in that school even is. So I would just say that like overall in terms of the coaching, like it just sounds to me like there's an enormous amount of variability right now in terms of what that looks like and how useful teachers are finding it.
Yeah, so that's very interesting. So, Judy, when I coach, I don't work for a particular program or company.
Right.
I'm an independent. And the idea is that I have to really know my stuff in order to be able to take any program and make it work with those teachers in that school.
Right.
But the coaches that are, let's say, in-house coaches, they need to know a program deeply and have the time enough to process this to be able to support teachers. So it's kind of like this catch-22. It's like you go in, you're not working for the program, but you have to know it well enough. But then if you hire somebody from a program, often it's like they're one-trick ponies. They know the program, but they don't know reading as a whole, and they think that teachers can make this work, even though it might not be possible to make it work because they only know the program. They don't know the big picture. That's what I see, that when there are these program people, they might know that particular program very well, but ask them to deviate, ask them to be flexible. They don't really know because they don't often have years of experience to deviate from the program. Any thoughts about that? Just having been in the classroom and in a coaching position, because you and I have that similar background. Your thoughts?
So, my journey has been really, really interesting. So I was in the classroom for over 15 or 16 years. Then I was in read and recovery, which, I talked about on many episodes. It had many strengths, but it had many flaws. But yet that was intensive training that I received, right? Little by little, I received intensive training. Then, the science and evidence really showed me that things were shifting in literacy. And then again, I got intensive support as a literacy coach when I was part of the Universal Literacy Initiative and also part of Literacy Collaborative. I got letters trained. Then on my own, I went to get Orton Gillingham training. Like I basically invested every ounce of my being, not just in, different curriculums, but really understanding the science on a really deep level. And then also taking that work and working with students, whether it be during the school day or after school or on the weekends. And I think, I loved working for Central, but, that position didn't exist anymore. So I had to go on my next journey. I became now an in-house coach. And I have to say, I'm loving every minute of being an in-house coach. I love my staff. I love their passion. I love how invested they are in the science of reading. I love the stability.
But the question is, I'm
But
asking
they're
you.
lucky to have me because I had a lot of training. I wasn't
Okay,
just
so then
them.
that's okay.
That's the thing.
That's the thing. All right, let's get to the heart of this.
That's the thing. I had a lot of training.
Okay, so you had various experiences and trainings and so did I, and I would seek out my own training as well.
If I have to be honest with you, Faith, a lot of people like me that had a similar training to me now also, you know, took the same path as I did. We just chose buildings that we either supported for a couple of years or buildings where we wanted a fresh new beginning. And we're hoping to continue, you know, doing all that good work and supporting schools.
So Alex, so you're talking to two people who have gone into classrooms and have done the work and still do the work, right?
Faith, how many years of experience do we have combined? 26 plus what? How many do you have?
37. So, you know, it's a lot. We have a lot of experience. So the point is not about us right now. The point is that we're speaking to you, Alex, that, you know what, we know what it takes to coach. It's not just here's a program, make it happen. You have to know something, all the ins and outs of it, and you have to be able to pivot and to help teachers pivot, because sometimes you have a program, and as Judy noticed, that there are some parts of a program that really aren't even grade appropriate. Like in first grade, in one of the programs, kids were being asked to do independent writing of answering higher level questions that they couldn't possibly do at that point in time, and yet the program is supposed to be evidence-based. Do you, Alex, think that maybe school districts are missing the mark in terms of the importance of the coaching piece when it comes to adopting any new program? That you know, I think that we have to talk about this because it is an important piece. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so my knowledge is basically pretty limited to New York City, so I'm a little reluctant to like weigh in more broadly on like what school districts are doing like across the country. But like from the New York City perspective, like I don't know, one of the things that's really interesting that I think is sort of like a corollary to this discussion about like coaching is like whether teachers feel like they understand like why these changes are happening. Like it's one thing to be like, we're switching curriculums and here are some people who are knowledgeable about the nuts and bolts of these programs and like are going to help you implement. But like the step before that is to like really understand like why practices need to change and like what the rationale behind that is. And I think like one thing that I just hear a lot from teachers is like confusion about like how these particular curriculums were chosen and like how they link up or don't link up to like these broader principles about like how kids are supposed to learn how to read. I think part of that is like there is genuinely like not, at least that I've seen, you guys might know this better than I do, but like I haven't seen at like the curriculum level like a lot of detailed research or explanation about like what sort of the evidence is behind like one approach or another. And like the three curriculums that New York City has chosen are actually different in some pretty key ways. So like the city even seems like on some level kind of agnostic about like what the particular approach is. Like they didn't pick one curriculum, they're giving superintendents a little bit of some choices. But like I just do hear a lot from teachers, like especially those who were using units of study, which is like Lucy Calkins' curriculum. Like there are elements of that that they really like. Like they like sort of the idea that what they're doing is leading students on a path to becoming like really excited about literature, and like felt like there were some like structures within that program that helped them do that. So when you're saying to a teacher like, no, we're not going to like let you give students so much time for independent reading anymore, and like we want you to move away from like having a leveled library, and like I think some teachers are like, well, like you're not explaining to me like why I'm not supposed to be doing that, and like what approaches you actually want me to be using and how those are better. That's sort of like a line of argument that I hear a lot. And so I think like, I'm not sure to what extent like the city has really persuaded teachers across the board of these changes. And like, that's like, I think that is part of like the training question and like the, like, what is the message that teachers are getting about like why these changes are happening?
Yeah, so the why is so important.
The rationale.
The rationale behind making the change and why these particular programs are the choices. What you're saying is, I think, Alex, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think what you're saying is that because it seemed a little rushed, that this important why was missed along the way. And so not only are they getting the program very quickly without the support, they don't really have the buy-in at this point.
And buy-in is important, Faith. Like, you know, people still want to know more. Like, we know it, right? We live and breathe this, Faith and I, right? We think about this every day. And even though we breathe it every day, I still pick up the phone and I call Faith. Hey, what do you think the library should look like? What kind of books should we have now that we're getting rid of level text? Right? It happened today, right, Faith? After work, yes. I called you. So even, you know, with people with a lot of experience, we still want to still get it right. But, you know, simple things like, okay, you know, there's a shift from guided reading to small group instruction that's more structured. I think, you know, depending on people's level of training and understanding of the science, the why piece could be very, very helpful. But also, I think what could be very helpful is okay, this is the why, and this is how you do it, right? And I think Faith brought up a really good point before when she said that, you know, people from these curriculum companies sometimes come and sometimes they don't have those 25 years in the classroom, or they don't have that experience being coaches.
They don't even have 5 years sometimes. They have like a couple of years. They're trained in the program, and then they're the ones helping.
Right. And of course, that's not everybody, but that's many people. But also, you know, think about it, right? There's so many good people that are in the DOE that would love to be these reading experts. So like when you see like a lot of other companies coming from the outside, yes, that could be a beautiful partnership, but it's also like, don't we have people from within that could do a great job doing that, you know, maybe tier 1, not tier 1, but tier 2, tier 3 intervention also, you know, we have a lot of really knowledgeable people. And I hope that people are utilized to their greatest capability of helping kids, because the urgency is really, really real. And Faith, I wanted to bring something else to your attention. So I've been seeing a lot of buzz about Alex's article all over the internet. Jennifer Saravallo has been posting all day. And I actually saw Emily Hanford retweet one of Jennifer's posts. Can I read it to you?
Of course.
So it says, so Jennifer wrote, this is a cautionary tale. Throwing out one curriculum and swapping it in for a new one is not it. Leaders, are you listening?
Well, there's truth to that. You know, there really is truth. What do you think about that, Alex? About just, you know, the idea of, you know, just swapping one for the other, you know, might not be the answer just because it has the SOR behind it, that, you know, it says science of reading, that there are still problems. Your thoughts?
But I was actually, I know Alex is going to speak, but I just want to jump in for 1 second. I get what you're saying too, Faith, but it actually bothered me a little bit because right now I think we need to be the cheerleaders for getting change to happen. And those kind of words can actually not move the work forward if they're misinterpreted by some people that are reading
misinterpreted, but, and I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's a fair statement in terms of just, I do. I think it's a fair statement because when you look at those teachers, that's what they're dealing with. they're dealing with a program that was removed. And believe me, I'm drinking right now. I'm going to say it to Lucy's program, and that it's
She's drinking to say goodbye.
drinking to say so long. No tears shed really from me. But the idea is that if you're bringing in something, we have to be able to support teachers. You can't just assume that because you say science of reading, everything's going to go well and the kids are all of a sudden going to do, wonderful things with it. Alex, your thoughts on that statement?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is like one of my big reporting questions, which is like, how much does a curriculum change translate into different teaching practices at a classroom level? That's like a really hard question to answer systematically. Like there are tens of thousands of classrooms across the city. But yeah, I think this is like one of the big questions, right? Is like, you can say to a school, like, here's the curriculum you have to use, but like it's not totally clear like how they're going to even like enforce that shift. And like that's partly why I brought up the like buy-in question, because I do think like to a certain extent, like if you need buy-in to like get educators to embrace like a new curriculum. And just in talking to some like literacy experts, my sense from them is that like having a high quality curriculum is like a necessary but not sufficient condition to good instruction, and that there are like lots of other instructional things that need to happen in order for the curriculum rollout to work. And that like and I think there are still like some open questions about like and this is another sort of reporting question of mine, but like did the city pick the best curriculums, and like do we know what the best curriculums are? Like is there like I think people sort of talk about the science of reading as if it's like a curriculum that you can just deploy in classrooms and like that's it, like okay, we're doing the science of reading, like everything's great. But like it just seems like much more complicated to me in terms of like figuring out, well, what practices are those, and like how do you actually implement them? Like one concrete example here is like one thing that I heard from a couple different teachers is like, a lot of them are using InterReading, the HMH curriculum, which I think is pretty popular across the country, and not just in New York City, but like a lot of them are trying to figure out like, okay, this curriculum involves a lot more time where students are on the rug and it's a lot more teacher directed instruction. And like my students are having trouble like sitting still for 30 or 40 minutes while I'm trying to like teach them a skill or teach them like move through this curriculum, which feels pretty packed with teacher directed activities. Whereas like when a lot of teachers were using like units of study, like they were teaching a very short mini lesson for 10 to 15 minutes and then moving into something else, and like the kids were moving around the room. It just felt like an easier thing to manage in some way. Like that's a specific example where I feel like where teachers are saying to me like, I would love to see a teacher do a demo lesson where they're getting the kids to sit for 40 minutes of teacher-led instruction, because like my kids aren't sitting for that. So like that's an example where I've heard some teachers say like, I wish the coach in my school would get in front of the room with my kids and deliver this. And I think that partly stems from like a critique that I often hear from teachers about like, well, will this curriculum work for my kids, like the kids in my room? And I think a lot of them are craving like strong examples of it working for their kids, and like do want it to work, but are still running into actual problems in practice that they don't feel like they have good answers to. I don't know if that totally answered your question, but
yeah, no, you brought up so many good points, Alex. So many good points. They are craving to watch someone actually do it. What they're kind of saying is, yeah, it's in the manual, but can anyone really do this in real time? And that's why Judy and I talk about this, that we're real teachers. And I know I'll speak for myself here. Anytime a school district asks me to do something, I never say no. If they want me to model something, I'm going to model it. And if I think it is BS, I call BS. All right. I will call BS and say, this doesn't work. It is not practical. It cannot be done because I do the work myself. So, Judy, we have this conversation a lot about people who talk about teaching, but they don't teach. It's very easy to talk about teaching and say, oh, yeah, well, this happens and the kids will do this. And then sometimes you'll have researchers who haven't even seen a kid in God knows how long, or you have maybe administrators who are very out of touch. And I'm not talking about any particular building. I'm just talking that, it's very easy for people to comment when they're not in the rooms doing this. So, I do think Alex makes so many valid points about this. And it shows in his article and what he's saying that teachers are craving, a model. They need a model. Can this be done? And as Alex said, are these programs even, the best ones out there? How are these decisions made? And, again, not to criticize anybody, but we don't know. We really don't. And, what are your thoughts, Judy, just in terms of that, having that model? Do you think, as somebody who coached, wouldn't you like a model of the model?
Right. Well, I think there's been tons of research and many observations that coaching does work. I think even Nate Joseph on one of our episodes spoke about the effect size of coaching, and what coaching cycles actually should have are embedded planning, co-planning, embedded debriefing, models, a visit before the model, maybe one visit, maybe two visits, modeling. There should be co-teaching, side-by-side coaching, where you're just whispering in the ear and giving a little tip before you let that little bird fly into the sunset and, do well on their own. And it's also fluid model. Maybe a teacher saw you, co-teach together, but the teacher's still feeling really, really shaky. And maybe you have to take a step back and model again. It doesn't just happen. Learning how to do something and do it well doesn't just happen through the power of osmosis. It very often requires a lot of work together, a lot of collaboration with teachers, planning a lesson with a teacher from start to finish and then delivering it is so powerful, using those tools together. But I think it's also important for a teacher to see a coach being vulnerable, seeing a coach maybe mess up on a lesson. Oh, well, it didn't go that well.
That's a great point. You're human. You're human.
I'm only human. And even me, sometimes teachers will be like, oh my God, these tasks, the kids are having a hard time. And then they're like, oh my God, should we have to create another task? And and I say this in every episode, teachers are just trying to get through the day also. They don't have an endless amount of time to go home, to feed their family, to maybe take a shower and then plan, differentiate these lessons so that, it meets the needs of the learners, because maybe the worksheets that, any curriculum provided works for the students, because they don't all work for the students. I don't know if any of these curriculums have a researcher looking at every single task. And I think tasks are a really hard thing. And I think that, maybe a lot of teachers are feeling defeated because, research and evidence-based programs, a lot of them came with a lot of assessments, right? And maybe the data looks ugly at first. And that's really hard for teachers to see data that is not where they want it to be, right? There's a shift, there's a learning curve, and maybe they're not getting the results that they want. And they're wondering why we're not getting the results. And that's going to mean tweaking things. And it goes back to what Maureen Ruby, one of our guests, said on one episode. A curriculum is just a tool, right? It's not going to be perfect. Not everything's going to work for the students. And I think a really important piece in general is whatever curriculum you're using is to think about the gradual release model and what that means. I'm showing you something, I'm going to do it as a teacher. I'm going to show you the way my brain is working out loud. I'm going to show you how I'm doing something so you see the way my brain works. Then we're going to practice together. We're going to do what we do it, not this 2-minute we do it that we practiced for 1 second. We're going to get those dry erase boards out. We're going to get that marker to the chart and write things together. We're going to practice. Maybe you need some more practice, and you're going to have to get on the rug with your friends and practice together before you go work independently. And I think so much attention has to be on looking at what are our students producing independently. And if you look at that task and those tasks don't look strong, then you got to think about, what did I do in that lesson? Maybe you followed that curriculum to a T and your work product didn't come out where kids really came out attaining that skill. You got to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah. So
that's something that administrators need to also be mindful of. Sometimes the gradual release has to be fluid. Sometimes even our kids in our classes need an additional model. Yeah. And, I'm blessed to be in a place that is very responsive to that, but I don't know how that looks everywhere else. There's a lot of bumpy curves, and a lot of these curriculums are knowledge building curriculums. And sometimes teachers are feeling that's great. Kids are learning to think in the early years and they're learning to comprehend, but is there enough time to read and apply the things that they're learning in, maybe foundations or maybe in their phonics program, and now learn to read? A lot of the kids aren't getting enough practice in a lot of places that, I've spoke to other parents and so forth.
Well, I think, Alex, I know I want to be mindful of your time. Yeah. I know you said we have to wrap up around this time.
Yeah.
I just want to piggyback on what Judy said to wrap up. In your article, you had written that the curriculum is packed with resources, from vocabulary and spelling materials to writing activities, with little time to get to them all, teachers said. And I think that's kind of what Judy is talking about. There could be a ton of choices, but what do they pick? They're not doing everything, and there's not enough time in the day, and they need that guidance. Your last thoughts, Alex, about that statement and just wrapping it up.
Yeah, I think that's been a pretty consistent theme with teacher reactions, again, particularly the InterReading curriculum, that part of the appeal of the program is that in an effort to one thing that some literacy experts have said is, like, in order to appeal to like a pretty wide array of school districts, like big curriculum companies tend to pack in like lots of different strategies and lots of different materials. I know that InterReading also has like a pretty extensive like set of digital materials that teachers are trying to figure out how to navigate. And like, I think that, and also just by virtue of that, like the lessons that the curriculum imagines are pretty lengthy, and teachers don't have the time to get to everything. And so I think teachers are just trying to figure out, like, okay, like, how do I edit this into something manageable? And then there are other situations where, like, I was talking to a teacher who told me that one of the lessons that she was trying to teach assumed that students knew how like apostrophes worked, and that had actually never been taught. And she was wondering, like, oh, well, maybe InterReading deals with that in an earlier grade level that I'm used to, but like they didn't have InterReading last year, so like the kids coming into my room didn't know anything about those rules. So she just like taught a mini grammar lesson on the fly, but she felt like it wasn't a very good lesson because she hadn't really planned for it. And so I think there's just like a million little examples like that where teachers are just trying to figure out, like, which elements of this should I be using, and like how should that look. One just sort of broader point I wanted to make too was just that like these changes like aren't happening in a vacuum. And that like educators are dealing with just like a lot of different things right now. So um, you know, they're still dealing with like the aftermath of the pandemic and you know, student learning loss. And I was talking to some elementary school teachers who are, you know, struggling with students who just like hadn't like they weren't even distributing books to students because they didn't feel like they had the skills to really read it all yet, which was a little bit unusual. This is a second grade classroom. You know, schools are dealing with like really high rates of chronic absenteeism still. So getting students in the door and just making sure they're present for the reading lessons is a big challenge. Like there's lots of mental health stuff going on. I don't know. I just feel like I just wanted to like make space for a moment to just recognize that like teachers are dealing with like a lot on top of this curriculum shift. And that like, yeah, this like this their sort of desire for more training and more coaching and more help with this sort of is coming against the backdrop of like lots of other things that are happening in schools. And a final plug, if I'm allowed to do that here, it would just be that like if you're a teacher who's like interested in talking about this stuff, like I'm always looking for more people to sort of help me understand what's happening in classrooms. So my contact info is pretty readily available on Chalkbeat's website, but I'm always looking to talk to more teachers. So if they're you know, if your listeners are interested in like continuing this kind of conversation with me, I'd really welcome that.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, Alex. And we will put your contact information in the
Yeah.
show notes.
Yeah, and I saw
Great.
Alex made to a great survey. I think I saw it today. I think once for administrators and once for teachers. I thought that was really awesome to give people voice.
So, Judy, why don't you tell people how to get in touch with us, and we'll wrap this up. This was awesome. Go ahead, Judy.
All right. So follow us on Facebook, Real Teachers, The Literacy View, Real Teachers Letting Loose. Follow us on Instagram, on our new Instagram page, The Literacy View. Follow Faith on X or Twitter at High Five Literacy. Follow me on Twitter at Boxner Judy. And also you can follow us at our own things. And that's about it. And also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also, subscribe to us on Apple, Buzzsprout, Spotify, wherever you are, and leave us a nice review, say something nice, and let your friends know about what we're doing. We're trying to make a difference one view at a time.
Thank you. And for everybody out there, I know there are teachers listening, and we hear you. And we are listening to what's happening. We're listening to how principals are trying their best to get the best programs in. This is really a lot. It's a lot for everybody. And you might feel like you're alone, but you're not. And I will put a plug out there, as Alex plugged getting in touch with him. You can also get in touch with us at the Literacy View, because we would love to follow up with teachers, having a discussion with real teachers and allowing you to let loose with us. So we'll wrap this up. Good night, everyone. And I hope you will be watching when we have our show with Jennifer Buckingham on. And we're going to talk a lot about comprehension and how strategies are really important. And we have a lot of things planned. So we'll talk soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.